Rainbow Dash Wants a Hug from Applejack by FireRain. Finally, another hard day of work over with, Applejack said as she finished bucking a tree, wiping her sweaty brow as she watched the delectable fruits of her labours drop into a nearby basket, varying in rainbows of colour. Now we can maybe get some pies ready for the market stall tomorrow, she said, tipping her Stetson hat back over her head. Her hooves were covered in bark scraps and her orange coat was matted with dirt, a mix of leaves and broken twigs entangled in her fur and mane, a reward that was received with each buck she delivered to each individual tree in her family's orchard. Best haul this to the barn for later, she said, bending down to retrieve the handle of the basket between her strong teeth, dragging it with ease. Since the day Applejack began working the farm, she was far from the pony she is today. As an amateur, she was a wet noodle, hardly capable of knocking a leaf from a tree, let alone an apple. Despite the hardships time had bestowed upon her, she'd always prevailed and grown stronger, eventually morphing into the very mare she is today. Her father always said that she always did him proud. He wasn't wrong, and even Granny Smith, her grandmother, agreed. Even her brother Big Macintosh would fight her on the argument, which led to endless challenges as the two siblings worked the fields together to provide for the family, determined to prove who the strongest apple was. Reaching the barn, located off a short few minutes of dragging from the orchard, Applejack released the bucket of freshly harvested apples, the bucket landing with a suppressed pomp, cushioned by many layers of carefully organised hay and straw.
Oh, hey AJ.
A voice called out from somewhere within the barn, right as Applejack was about to turn and leave and return home. She turned around with a fright, a gasp escaping her cool lips as she scanned around the room for the source of the voice. Eventually she looked over to the back of the room, off to where a pile of hay bales was stacked neatly into a small mountain.
I've been waiting for you.
There, leaning against the bales of hay and wearing a smile, was her friend Rainbow Dash. She stood on her hind legs, an elbow resting on top of a hay bale. The other posed sassily at her side. She blew her mane out of her face so she could better face her farm pony friend. Applejack raised her brow at her, both suspicious and annoyed at her sudden appearance, not that she wasn't happy to see a friend, of course. Yet when it's Rainbow, she knew that anything could transpire, and not in a good way. You scared the jiminies out of me, Sugar Cube. Why y'all hiding out in my barn? She approached the prism-maned Pegasus, her eyes locked on her the same way a bull looks at a red flag.
Just thought I'd drop by to say hi,
she replied innocently, allowing herself to drop from her leaning position to stand on all fours of her cyan hooves. She levelled her eyes with Applejack and looked deeply into her eyes.
Hi,
she said, waving her hoof with a small mischievous smile. Applejack frowned, unamused at her antics. Very funny, Rainbow, she said, pushing her hoof down with a light shove. Now what do you need? I've got to go back and help Granny Smith prepare dinner, she said, clearly not in the mood for any pranks or gimmicks. Rainbow rolled her eyes.
Oh, please, AJ. I came because I wanted to ask you a question,
she said simply, bringing her face close to her friend's to the point she could feel and smell her minty breath. Applejack's unamused glare dropped in an instant, replaced by confusion. That's it? A question? She said, somewhat not believing the Pegasus. Well, shoot. What's this question of yours?
Well,
Rainbow began, tapping her front hooves together, looking at the ground.
It's a really big question,
she said, bringing her eyes up to meet Applejack's and inching her muzzle closer with each word. Go on, the farm pony ushered, rolling her hoof eagerly.
Like, so big that it's enormous?
Yes.
As in you could fit it in a 1,000,000-page book?
Now, I find that incredibly hard to believe, but go on.
And if you tried to fit it in a book, you wouldn't deliver it correctly?
Consarn it, girl, what? Applejack said loudly, her tone irritated, pushing Rainbow's face away, removing her from her personal space. Just out with it already! Shoot! Rainbow stared at her for a while, absorbing her body language and her face of agitated heat, her cheeks warm and glowing with a tinge of pinkish red.
Oh, those adorable little cheeks with their white freckles.
Rainbow could almost not contain herself from reaching out to squeeze them, but she pulled back her mental leash. Eventually she smiled and said,
I want a hug.
The room fell silent for what seemed like hours, the duo of best friends entering a staring contest. Applejack with small, frozen eyes and Rainbow with a simple, warm and friendly smile, acting as if this was normal. Applejack shook her head. Well, shucks, that's all y'all wanted to ask? A hug?
Yep,
Rainbow replied, imitating AJ's big brother and opening her hooves up. AJ rolled her eyes and complied, wrapping her hooves around her friend and accepted the embrace request. She couldn't understand why, but she humoured her anyway. Rainbow Dash felt herself blush as she pressed her cheek into Applejack's, absorbing their utterly adorable plush chubbiness and warmth. Oh, how she'd always wanted to do this. She'd dreamed of it. She'd longed for it. She practically needed it, and now she had it, the mare of her dreams encased in her hooves. She smiled in triumph, mentally pumping the air with a victorious hoof.
Thank you, Celestia,
She whispered to herself, hardly containing her blush.